Centennial School Board, especially Mr. Hartline, right? And of course, thank you to the members of the Centennial community, not only those that are in attendance tonight, but those that participated in the community survey, those that submitted questions, which we'll get to shortly, and of course, those that are either watching this live on the live stream or at some point in the future on the YouTube channel. It's wonderful to be at Log College. A little bit about me. As Ms. Brancato said, my name is Mark Hoffman. I'm the proud executive director of the Bucks County Intermediate Unit. This is actually the end of my 10th year serving as the executive director of the Intermediate Unit. And it's the end of my 18th year serving the Bucks County Intermediate Unit in a variety of different roles, previous to my time as executive director. Prior to that, I was a teacher in a local school district as well as an instructional technology specialist in a neighboring intermediate unit. But Bucks County is my home. It's where I grew up. And in fact, I've sat in your seats many times, though they looked a little different. And that's because I lived in Warminster for many, many years. My kids attended Leary when it was still open, of course. Willowdale and my daughter attended Log College. So I remember sitting in those seats. They were a little more uncomfortable, though, if I recall, when my daughter was in the school district at the time. And my wife is a William Tennant graduate, and her parents still live in the same home, which they've owned since the 1970s. So I know Warminster, and I was a longtime member of the Warminster community. Which brings us back to why we're here in Log College. Selecting a superintendent is a central responsibility of any school district board of directors in the state of Pennsylvania. There are articulated things in the state code that describe what a school board does, and chief among them, though not exclusively, is the selection and evaluation of a superintendent. And then it's the superintendent that implements and executes the vision and direction and the governance that's provided by the board. And so, of course, Ms. Brancato foreshadowed just a few seconds ago the work that the board has done collectively in this process over the last several months, and we want to thank them for that time. I'd like to take a moment to explain the process for this evening, as well as the process that got us to this evening. And that's where I'll start. How did we get here? What was the process and what did it look like? Now, a lot of this has been explained in press releases, but for the purposes of having it all in one condensed format, particularly at this community forum, I thought it would be important to repeat everything just so that everybody understands the process that was followed. So it was at the end of January that the Centennial Board of School Directors reached out to the Intermediate Unit and asked if we could provide support in identifying the next superintendent in the Centennial School District. And of course, as I just referenced to you, it's not the Intermediate Unit that selects superintendents or other positions in Bucks County. This is something that we do quite regularly, actually. However, while we're not selecting or making decisions, what we do is provide a legally defensible, tried and true process to a school district to assist them, because typically when you go through personnel issues in the school district, it's the superintendent that supports the process. And if it's the superintendent that's leaving, oftentimes the board wants to rely on a third-party facilitator. And in Bucks County, oftentimes, school boards ask the Intermediate Unit to do that work for them. And so we entered into a zero-cost contract, so the Intermediate Unit doesn't charge school districts to provide executive searches. However, the school district did reimburse the Intermediate Unit for any of our costs. It's expensive to advertise for a position. So when we met with the board, we went over a series of questions that helps to define the process. So while we facilitated, every search is different, every search is unique, just like every school district is different and unique. And so the format and the process that we followed was specific to the direction given to us by the board. And so you see that as we work through the process, it's a conversation, and we figure out how do we want this process to work to ensure maximum participation based on the will and the direction of the board. And it's the Intermediate's pleasure and honor to have provided that. So one of the first things that the board asked us to do was to start collecting feedback from the community, and we did that in a variety of ways. One of the first ways was there were board-selected, board-identified groups of stakeholders that we met with early on in the process. And so members of the Intermediate Unit team would meet with those identified selected members, and they were representative of various groups in the community. And we asked them two questions. And that led to rich conversation. and a lot of data that we used to help inform the process, not only the questions that we asked, but also the kind of candidate that we were looking to find, that we were recruiting. And so one of the questions that we asked, I mentioned there were two. So the first was, what key characteristics and traits are you looking for in your next superintendent? And what priorities should the next superintendent focus on in the coming year? And so we asked that question over and over again, and we got a lot of information. But we didn't limit our data collection to just having conversations with select groups of identifiers. Instead, we wanted to make sure, at the board's request, that everyone had an opportunity to chime in and to provide feedback on the process. And so they asked us to create a survey that was made available online. And that survey was open from February 17th through February 28th of this year. And during that time, more than 250 parents, guardians, staff, students, and community members responded to the survey. The survey asked key questions about the characteristics desired in the superintendent, similar to the questions that we asked at the stakeholder group, priorities for the district's short and long-term goals, same as the stakeholder groups, as well as ranking and prioritizing other key attributes and priorities for the school district. If you survey people, it's important that you provide them with the information collected in the survey. And so the results of the survey were synthesized, compiled, and aggregated, and provided on the school district's website for anyone to view. And they're still there today. So it was using insights from that data collection in the various ways that I described that the IU launched a comprehensive search for the next superintendent. So our role in that process is to make sure that far and wide folks know that this opportunity is available. And we do that through traditional recruiting efforts. So if you're looking for a job, you go to Indeed, or you go to Monster, or you go to LinkedIn. We do the same thing. So we post in all those places. And it's typically at an expense because we want to make sure that it's noticed and not lost. And so we ask that those positions are promoted broadly and actively. And we didn't just recruit locally. The search was a national search. And it was advertised not only through those channels, but through informal channels of phone calls and networks and word of mouth. And so, of course, everybody at some point learned that the Centennial School District was looking for a superintendent, whether they're subscribed to national superintendent search websites, or if they happen to be in a neighboring county, or if they happen to be here in Bucks County. After the application window closed, we had a total of 32 applicants that the board reviewed. They had access to all 32 applications. And it was interesting, we noted this in the press release as well. Candidates were from Pennsylvania as well as 7 other states. So the national reach clearly worked because we had applicants from Arizona, Delaware, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, and Wisconsin. And as a reminder, as these applications came in, it was the board's job, through facilitation and guidance from the intermediate unit, to rank and decide who they'd like to bring in for an interview. And then similarly, after the first interview, who they'd like to bring back, etc. It was following a first round of interviews that the board invited 3 candidates back. And it was at that second round interview that we had various things, not just traditional questions and answers, but a writing sample that was impromptu, that you could not prepare for, as well as a presentation that they were asked to give to the board that they did have time to prepare for. And then, of course, there were in-depth questions that the board had influence in asking. Of course, we asked the board, what kinds of questions would you like? And then we synthesized as an intermediate unit, this is what the questions might look like based on what you're interested in and based on the feedback. And then the board had an opportunity to adjust those questions. And then, of course, following best practice, it's essential that all candidates in any given round are asked the same questions in the same way. And that's a process that is tried and true and legally defensible. It was after that round that the board decided, a majority of the board decided, that Dr. Lucabaugh would be the finalist candidate. And at this point, all candidates had been promised, to the best of the board's ability, through confidentiality commitments, that their names would not be revealed. But after Dr. Lucabaugh was told that he was the finalist candidate, we asked him to waive his confidentiality so that we could check references and so that others could know that the board was considering him to be the superintendent. And that's why his name has been known to you for so long. He waived his confidentiality. But notice the other candidates, their names are not known because their confidentiality has not been waived. On May 15th, 2025, at the board's request, the IU invited board-identified community and staff representatives to meet with Dr. Lucabaugh, and they were provided an opportunity to ask questions of Dr. Lucabaugh. Simultaneously, the May 8th press release, which detailed much of what I just shared with you, also announced tonight's community forum. And again, I thank you for being here and participating in this event tonight. So in short, tonight is comprised of 3 parts. Shortly, Dr. Lucabaugh will offer some introductory remarks. Following Dr. Lucabaugh's introductory remarks, he and I will go to Stage Center, and I'll ask him some questions based on the community forum survey that was available, and I'll talk about that when we start that process. I'll give you a similar rundown of how the questions were developed. And then we'll end with closing comments from Dr. Lucabaugh after the Q&A, with a farewell from Ms. Brancato as the board president. As a reminder, the press release articulated everything that I just shared with you, as well as the format for tonight. And later in the program, when Dr. Lucabaugh and I are on the stage, again, I'll go over how the questions were collected and the spirit of the questions and how I ultimately decided which ones to ask. Following this community forum, as shared in the press release, the board is scheduled to consider the appointment of Dr. Lucabaugh as the next superintendent at its May 27th meeting of the Board of School Directors. So with all that said, and I know it was a lot of information, thank you. It's my great pleasure, it's my honor to introduce to you for the first time as your finalist candidate for some introductory opening remarks, Dr. Abe Lucabaugh. Abe, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. Can you all hear me okay? No. Okay. How's that? Okay, we're in. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman, for that introduction. And good evening, everyone. My name is Abe Lucabaugh, and it's a privilege to stand and meet with you tonight. First of all, I'd like to thank so many of you for coming out tonight and spending your time to be here. I'd also like to thank you for the completion of surveys and for your interest in the Centennial School District. I'd like to thank our Board of Directors for this opportunity as well. Thank you for the chance to be here and speak with you. And also for all of the Centennial staff who are giving their time to be here tonight to make this event successful. It means a great deal. Recently, I had the privilege of attending my daughter's college graduation in Washington, D.C. The keynote speaker for that event was a foreign dignitary who worked in the nation of Africa, in the continent of Africa, and had significant experience working with Nelson Mandela. And he shared his interactions with Nelson Mandela, and in particular, he talked about one of Mandela's famous quotes, which is, "Education is the greatest weapon we have to bring about change in the world." And the speaker mentioned that while he understood Mandela's use of the word weapon, he thought that perhaps a better term would be instrument. Education is the greatest instrument to bring about change in the world. And I thought about that, and I thought, you know, I like that term, instrument, because it's a tool. And that's what education really is. It's a tool, it's a way to give students a strategy so that they can live their best lives. And it matters, and it's so critically important, especially at this time in our nation's history. Throughout my experiences as a professional over 27 years, I've witnessed firsthand the transformative power of education. I've watched students' lives change. I've watched parents' perceptions of their students change, and it's been incredible. I saw it as a high school English teacher in Hatboro Horsham, as an administrator at Keith Valley Middle School in Hatboro Horsham, and then also in Central Bucks as a high school assistant principal, as principal of Central Bucks East, a job that I always said I got to do. It was a wonderful place to work. And also as an assistant superintendent, and then most recently as superintendent of the district. I believe in the power and the promise of education. I believe that we have an opportunity to change our students' lives and give them the tools and strategies that they need to go out into the world and build lives of excellence. And that's why we're here. And that's why I'm here in Centennial. It means a great deal. This work is very personal, it's important, and it's something that when we come together, we can create excellence and we can create a legacy for our students. And I look forward to sharing more of that with you in a few moments and answering questions. And again, I very much appreciate you being here and the opportunity to speak with you tonight.
So Dr. Lucabaugh, if you'd like to join me up on the stage, we can get to the question and answer part of the forum.
Okay.
All right, let's do it.
Thank you.
Okay, so back to some process and then to the questions. As a part of the Bucks IU's executive search model, we offer to conduct community forums just like this. It's a great way to introduce the finalist to the community and also a great way to allow in a short period of time or in a reasonable period of time, people to ask as many questions as possible. Because we know there's going to be a lot of questions. And so rather than people have a line and ask questions, why don't you submit them in advance and the intermediate unit can take a look and then we can provide them. And that's the purpose and the format, and we find that it works well. And so that's the structured format that we advertise for this event, and it's the format we're going to follow, and it's the format that we've used very successfully for at least the last decade. So just a couple of reminders about where the questions I'm going to ask Dr. Lucabaugh came from, and the spirit of the questions that I'm going to ask him, and the words and the verbiage that I'm going to use pulled from those questions. So the Centennial Board of School Directors announced their intention to vote on an employment agreement with Dr. Lucabaugh at their meeting on the 27th. In advance of the 27th, the board invited members of the community to participate in this community forum, either in person or online, or by submitting questions, or some combination of those. Those submitted questions per the protocol were consolidated by themes by me to allow Dr. Lucabaugh to address the maximum number of topics possible during the forum. I'm unable to ask every question verbatim, and you'll see there's a lot of overlap, which I'll explain. Per the advertised protocol, I reviewed each question and developed about 10 based on the larger themes of the questions posed. Embedded in the questions that I'll ask are verbatim quotes from the questions that were submitted that are representative of those themes. So if you submitted a question, there's a very good chance you'll hear me use your words tonight. Dr. Lucabaugh has also received a copy of every question that was submitted, as well as the information for the question asker so that he can respond. With that, are you ready? Let me see if I have the data here on how many questions we got and how many question askers. I think I know it off the top of my head, but I don't want to guess. I think it's on the second page, Abe. There it is. From May 8th through May 15th, which is when the window was open, 31 individuals posed more than 56 questions for consideration. Okay, 56. So you'll hear those 56 themes embedded throughout. Does that make sense?
It does.
You ready?
I am.
All right. So question number one, Dr. Lucabaugh, at least 14 individuals submitted questions about your previous role as a superintendent. Some asked directly about public perception, lawsuits, and circumstances surrounding your departure. I'm going to give you some verbatim language that was used in some of the questions. Quote, can you please comment on the very public, local, and national reputation you'll bring to Centennial? Quote, what have you learned from your previous mistakes in your most recent position as superintendent? Quote, why should the public trust you? Quote, how you left your most recent position was less than ideal. What do you plan to do differently in Centennial? End quotes. So Abe, this is me again. Given those questions and the other questions that were about lawsuits from the ACLU and your severance agreement, would you like an opportunity to discuss these topics and the circumstances surrounding your departure from your previous position?
Yes, thank you, Mark. So this question reminds me of a book that I read recently. It's about a gentleman named Nick Saban, and he was the football coach at Alabama. And in the book, he talks about landing what he called his dream job. And that dream job was with the Miami Dolphins. 2 years into his dream job, he realized that his dream job was a nightmare. And the the book talks about, in order to be successful in your work and in your life, you have to be in the right spot. In 2004, I came to Central Bucks. It was a dynamic district. It was a district focused on education. It was a district that was forward-thinking. It was a district that was rooted and focused on what was best for every student. And it was a pleasure to work there. It would stay that way for about 15 years. And then around 2019 and that fateful day in March of 2020, things changed. Suddenly, it became a very political place. And over time, the political divide grew, and it deepened, and it widened, and it became more entrenched. In 2021, when I became superintendent, that divide was worsening. And it was very, very challenging to work with. Our board was incredibly divided politically. They were so dug in and so entrenched in their political beliefs that I found it almost impossible to effectively work in the role. It was so divisive. Additionally, there were some things that were going on internally in the board and some things that were happening to me as a superintendent that I found completely unacceptable. I can't say for sure, but I believe the board understood that what was happening was not okay. I was approached with an opportunity to separate from the district. It's not what I wanted to do, but in the end, instead of litigation, I decided that it was the best choice and the best course of action because I did not feel it was a place that I could be effective any longer. And that pained me. The takeaway is this. School districts need to focus on what is best for students, every student. And it takes a commitment from every single person in the organization. It requires the school board and its leadership. It requires the administration. It requires the teachers and the teachers union and their leadership, community leadership and parents to come together and commit that politics has absolutely no place whatsoever in education, none. And when you allow politics to become more important than what is best for students, and when you allow political ideology to surpass educational propriety, problems emerge. And one of the things that I have believed about Centennial, and at the risk of sounding a little nerdy, in preparation, when I saw that this job was posted, I started to watch board meetings. And I watched about 2.5 years ago. And I do not sense in my research that this is a district that cares to be political. I sense that this is a district. I sense that this is a district that wants to do what's best for students. And I believe it's a district that is committed to honoring the best needs of students. And I believe that if we work together, we can achieve that outcome. And that's why I want to be here.
Thanks, Abe. You ready for question 2?
I am.
All right. So question number 2. At least 13 questions related to how you plan to lead a school system that is safe, welcoming, and protective of all students. Some verbatim example language used in these questions included items like, quote, students learn when they feel belonging. How will you promote belonging in Centennial to foster an environment that promotes growth and learning? Quote, what are your plans to help our schools have less bullying, discrimination, and prejudice? Quote, what is your approach to supporting teachers and staff in creating a safe and welcoming learning environment? How will you balance leadership with respect for their professional judgment and expertise? Quote, how can you ensure that all students in the school feel safe, welcomed, and protected. End quotes. So Abe, Dr. Lucabaugh, can you tell us how you'll lead Centennial in a way that fosters safety, belonging, and support for all students?
Of course. In listening to the quotes and the comments from the community, I think it boils down what we're talking about is culture. We're talking about morale, we're talking about creating a sense of belonging for every individual, students, staff, pride in the community. And I think it begins with developing a culture of respect and dignity for every person. That means treating every single stakeholder in our district, our students, our staff, our parents, one another, the way adults behave with one another. It's very important that dignity and respect are a common theme across the board. And that's something that I expect, it's something that I will model, and it's something that I believe gives us an opportunity to do something very powerful. I think it's also recognizing that school districts are large entities and they're very interdependent. And what I mean by that is that there are so many different roles and jobs going on that deserve respect. And understanding and having an appreciation and an awareness of those roles and how they contribute. And I'll give you an example. I think about our bus mechanics, the men and women who work to make sure that our buses are on the roads, and our bus drivers who get up early in the morning to safely transport our students to schools. They cause learning. Our facilities and maintenance staff who work hard to keep our classrooms neat and clean and our buildings looking like the way our buildings do. And you have phenomenal facilities here in the district. Our teachers, our support staff, our guidance counselors, our psychologists, our supervisors, our administrators, our security, our IT, HR. I know I forgot the groups. All of them working together around a shared belief in what is best for kids and how do we work together to ensure the best student outcomes. And it's fostering that environment and that respect for one another that goes a long way. But I think in terms of also maintaining a safe environment for students, this is really important. Because I know that there are students who get up in the morning and they walk out the door with a lump in their throat because they don't know what's waiting for them that day. They don't know what they're going to experience. They don't know what they're going to hear and feel. And it's terrifying. And it's not okay. And I think we, and when I say we as the adults, we as the employees and the staff in the school district, have an opportunity to stand up for those students, to create a safe space for students. It is very important to display beliefs, but it's more important to act on those beliefs. And I'll give you an example. In many schools, when you walk down hallways, you'll see a sign that may say, bully-free zone. And that's good. However, if and when bullying occurs, or an injustice occurs toward a student, it is so important that adults, in that moment, act. And that is an expectation that I have for everyone in the district, that when you see an injustice, or when you hear something said to a child, you don't walk away, you don't turn your back. You rush in, and you support that student, and you make it a teachable moment so that kids feel welcome. And so by treating people with respect and kindness, acknowledging the many roles that folks play in the district, respecting those roles, and upholding what's best for our students and protecting them, I think that you can change culture.
So this is the third question, and it's related to the previous question, okay? Related to safe, protected, belonging schools. Welcome. So of those 13 questions that you just spoke to, 5 specifically reference the LGBTQ plus community of students in Centennial. So verbatim language used in those questions included items like, quote, how will you support students in marginalized groups? What do you say to people who fear your record of seemingly anti-LGBTQ policies? Quote, Centennial has a very diverse group of students across many spectrums. Can we trust that you'll keep things inclusive and avoid policies that will change the current homogeneous environment of our schools? End quotes. So, Dr. Lucabaugh, can you speak to these questions and to the theme of how you will support students who are members of the LGBTQ plus community in Centennial?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I will say policies that were passed in Central Bucks by the board are not policies that I advocate for in Centennial, and I do not want them here. It is a very challenging situation when you're a superintendent, and I'm going to share this because I'm not sure that everybody always understands the dynamic.
Yeah, please.
And if you do, I apologize. I'm certainly not trying to tell you something that you already know. But I have found in conversation that a lot of people are surprised by what I'm about to share. Boards, school boards, develop and pass policy. Superintendents are required to implement policy. And I will acknowledge that when policy was passed in Central Bucks, and it was my responsibility to implement policy, I did become the face of that policy. And I will sit here and tell you that it was personally and professionally very taxing. And I understand that. What will I do to make members of the LGBTQ community feel welcome? And by the way, I'm not just talking about students either, but I'm talking about employees of the district as well. They're all part of that. The first is seeking to understand. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I did in Central Bucks, when the board was considering some of the policies that they were about to pass, we had students come to our board meetings. They were brave, they spoke eloquently, they were articulate, and they spoke from the heart about their experiences as members of the LGBTQ community and what it meant and how they felt in schools. After listening to those students, I set up meetings with each of our Gay Straight Alliance clubs at each of our 3 high schools, both district's 3 high schools, and also met with the middle school group. Listening to the experiences of students was very difficult. It was hard to listen to what they dealt with day in, day out. And one of the themes that they continued to stress was we need people to act. It's not enough to just say something, you have to do something. And it was heartbreaking, and it was very difficult. One of the things that I'm going to do in Centennial, if given the opportunity, is to meet with our Gay Straight Alliances, to meet with members of the LGBTQ community. Not just students, but members in the community, members in the school community. I want to understand what you're feeling. I want to understand what your days look like. I want to understand how we can start to remove some of the obstacles and build bridges and work together to make you feel welcome and to make not just, but to feel everyone welcome. Because to the earlier point, Dr. Hoffman, about the importance of feeling belonging.
Yeah.
When you feel like you matter, when you feel like you're seen and you belong in the community, you're going to learn. You're going to do better. You're going to feel empowered. And we owe that, and I will pledge to do that.
Moving on to the 4th question. It continues on the previous theme of the last 2 questions about feeling safe, protected, and belonging. Of those same 13 questions, 3 were specific to your experience working with Latino, Hispanic, and other minority groups. Verbatim example language used in those questions included an item like, quote, "What has been your direct experience working with Latino families, students, and other marginalized, underrepresented minority groups?" End quote. Dr. Lucabaugh, can you speak to your direct experience, working with Latino, Hispanic, and other underrepresented communities, and how that shapes your leadership approach?
Of course. Well, I think some of my leadership approach was just framed early on in my life because I'm not from this area. And I grew up in an area that is, I think would be considered fairly diverse. And so just my upbringing and being in a diverse community framed my perspective early on. It's true that Central Bucks is stereotypically viewed as a very affluent Caucasian district. That is a stereotype. That said, the district is actually far more diverse than I think people realize. And I think that is a changing demographic. When I became assistant superintendent in 2018, I started meeting with student focus groups and at each of our 8 secondary buildings at the time. One of the themes that started to emerge in those conversations was the experience of students in underrepresented and minority groups. And they spoke very candidly. And I give our students a lot of credit for how forthright they are, how honest they are, and how passionate they are about how they feel. And they talked with me about what it means to be Latino or African American or in an underrepresented group in our schools, and some of the things that they struggle with. And we talked about ways to improve upon that. How do we bring awareness to it? There was one comment in particular, though, that really dove out at me, and it hit me. There was a young woman who shared that she was faced with a very difficult choice. Do I continue to practice my religion at the expense of my education? Or do I focus on my education at the expense of my religion? And I said, tell me more about that. And she proceeded to share how, because of her religious beliefs and her family's religious traditions, our school calendar and the way we structured time was completely incongruent with their beliefs. And she said, I'm always having to make choices and I'm tired of it. And that hit me. So we talked about it some more, and ultimately we were able to restructure our district calendar in a way that celebrated some additional holidays. And we had one young student in particular, actually not young student, a senior, who came and spoke passionately at our board meetings. And I'm very pleased that we were able to add Diwali to the calendar, and I know that the district continues to look at ways to improve upon that. So I brought those students together in August of 2019, and I hosted a community forum, a panel discussion. And we talked very openly about the experiences that the students were having in underrepresented groups. And that's something that I'm going to continue here in Centennial if given the opportunity. I want to understand the challenges. I want to understand challenges from families as well. And how do we build bridges? How do we make more connections? And how can we work to make every student feel that they are connected and a part and informed and respected, and to celebrate those differences. And those are some of the ways that I've worked in the past and the ways that I'll continue to do so in this role.
Thanks. We're going to move on to the 5th question. So we're about halfway there. All right. Dr. Lucabaugh, about 10 questions related to curriculum. So verbatim example language from those questions include items like the following. Quote, I have a child that fears her grades will be impacted if she disagrees with the political stance of a teacher, hindering her ability to learn independent thought. Quote, do you have any intentions to limit what books are available to students? Quote, how do you plan to ensure our kids are taught appropriate things and not forced to learn about sexuality? Quote, what is your view of intellectual freedom and how libraries and librarians can work with students and the district to ensure access to diverse literature? Quote, how will you safeguard the core of school, which is to educate our children and not to influence them with personal ideologies or distractions that do not serve their future, end quotes. So hearing those verbatim quotes, how will you approach leading curriculum design and selection? And how will you approach situations where books or curricular materials are challenged?
Well, at first, I think it's very important to trust the expertise that exists in the district. I've never worked in a district where there weren't incredible experts in curriculum design, in book selection, in all facets of education. To my earlier point, I think if I heard the quote correctly, the first one you shared.
Want me to read it again?
No, I think I have it. It is, to my earlier point, politics should be kept out of schools. And I do think that it's appropriate for a child to not know their teacher's political preferences. I think it's just better that way, and it's important. Again, I cannot stress enough how important it is to focus our efforts on what is best for students and students' growth. and keep politics out of the picture. So if we do that, that will take care of itself. From a curricular standpoint, it's about curriculum that is rigorous, curriculum that is relevant, curriculum that is standards-based, and curriculum that is comprehensive. It's called a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And because we have standards in place to guide our work, we can use that as that beacon and that benchmark to do that work. Regarding the question that I think was in there about books, as I stated before, I do not advocate for a policy on the removal and things of books. I think that there are ways to work on a case-by-case basis. And I believe that our librarians and our media specialists are able to guide those discussions and conversations, and our administrators can work within the confines of policy and with practice and the individual needs of students and families to do what's right for a child, both educationally and developmentally in those situations.
Thanks. This is the 6th question. Dr. Lucabaugh, there were 3 questions that asked what motivated you to pursue this opportunity and why you believe Centennial is a good match for you personally and professionally. You spoke about this a little bit, but in this opportunity up here, can you speak to what drew you to Centennial and the educational philosophy that will guide your leadership?
Well, what drew me to Centennial, first of all, I think it's a district that's poised to be very, very, very successful. And I want to applaud, first of all, the teachers in the district, the support staff, administrators, curriculum supervisors, and I think Dr. Bedden deserves credit as well, a lot of credit. Because if you look at your growth and your test scores and where you're headed academically, it's incredibly positive. And that doesn't happen by accident. That is the result of a very purposeful approach to teaching and learning. And so I do believe, based on my research, that Centennial is a district that is committed to teaching and learning. And that's why we're here. And that's a place, like I said in my introductory remarks, or in the first question.
Sure.
It's about being in a place where you feel you can be who you are. And in a district that values and supports and prioritizes students' learning, that's a place that I can match with. On top of that, my philosophy of education is that every child can learn, every child has the capacity to learn, and every child can rise far beyond what they thought was possible. And so the opportunity to see that growth in students and to work together as a school community and to help our students create a foundation is exciting. And my hope and vision for the district is very simple. I want students to leave our doors grateful that they came here, ready to seize the opportunities that they have because of what happened at Centennial. I want families to be able to say, I'm so glad that my children went to Centennial schools. I'm proud of them. I'm proud of our schools. I'm proud of our teachers. I want our teachers to say and feel that they're supported, they're listened to, they're respected, they're worked with, and they're valued. And I want the entire community to say, we're really proud of our district. And if we can do that, then we're onto something very special. And that's what I want for the district. And that's why I believe that it's a great fit, along with my passion for the work.
So this is the 7th question. There were 2 questions asked about special education. Verbatim example language from those questions included items like, quote, how will you support teachers who seem to be facing a growing number of students with special needs or behavioral issues? Quote, how do you plan to meet the needs of special education students, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged students, many of whom benefit from federal funds, with the district facing a potential decrease in federal funding? End quotes. So, Dr. Lucabaugh, can you walk us through your experiences supporting special education and what approach you'll take to ensure that all students, including those with IEPs, thrive?
So, I understand that teachers are carrying more weight than I think they've ever carried before. especially when it comes to supporting students with special needs and students with behavior issues. I believe that the job of teachers has never been more difficult. First thing I'm going to do, and this is what I did in Central Bucks, and this is what I would do here. The first thing I'm going to do is sit down with our Director of Special Education, Pupil Services, our special ed supervisors, and I want to find out, how are we currently supporting staff and students? What are we doing well? Where are some of the gaps? What do we need to improve upon? And then how do we narrow those gaps so that we can help to support all of our students? The second thing I will do is focus on the best professional development, teaching and behavioral strategies to work with challenging populations. One of the things that I did as a superintendent in the Central Bucks is learn about the impact of board-certified behavior analysts. There's a lot of acronyms in education. We call them BCBAs. They're a board-certified behavior analyst. When I started as a superintendent, we had 2 for the entire district. That was inadequate. We were able to raise that number to 8. Board-certified behavior analysts are trained specialists who understand behavior patterns, and they are teachers as well. So they work with students and staff and families to develop resources and approaches that help students to regulate behavior, help teachers to manage behaviors in an effective way. So that's one of the other things I would do. I would also take a very close look at how we are supporting our students' mental health. Mental health is real. It is on the rise, and the mental health challenges of students and staff, for that matter, are very important to address. One of the things that we did as a superintendent, and I say we because it was a team that put this together. It wasn't something that I alone did. We looked at our needs. We brought 5 mental health counselors into the district, and we increased our social workers from 3 to 9 to better support students and provide the programs and the resources that we need in order to bring about positive change. There was a question there about funding, and I think that's a real concern. I'm concerned about that. I think we should all be very concerned about funding and federal funding, especially given some of the concerns that are emerging right now about what that will look like over time. One of the things I will also do is take a very hard look at how we're spending money in special education, and are we actually able to retrieve some of the money that is spent? And I'll give you 2 examples. First, when districts enter settlements with students and families, making sure that those settlements are the result of a very careful process so that we are giving services that a student deserves, and not just immediately punting and saying, well, we'll just settle. That can become very costly. Also, there are many students in districts across the Commonwealth and also across the state who engage in the practice of placing students out of district. Usually when you place a student out of district, it comes at an exorbitant cost. It can cost upwards of several $100,000 for one child, depending on the situation. Now, don't get me wrong, there are times when it's important and it is the best course of action to place a child out of district. There are also times when you can build those programs internally, and you can do so in a way that actually saves money. But when we do place children out of district, if they graduate or if they return to the district, we have to make sure that we're grabbing that money, because those are real dollars. That's money that we can then take and reinvest here at home, and that's very important. One of the things that we did in Central Bucks was examine our out-of-district placements. How much money were we spending, and could we provide those services in district so students could be educated in their home schools, in their neighborhoods, and could we do it at a cost savings? In 3 years, we were able to pull back over 50 students at a $4 million savings. And that's money that we can then use to redistribute into programs and services to address budget deficits.
That's not how it works. That means that people are doing the IEP process in the least restrictive environment first?
So again, it's all part of a very careful process of making sure that in what we're doing, that we are legally compliant, but most importantly, beyond anything else, that we are serving the needs of families, that we are making sure that students are being educated appropriately and purposefully.
So we're on to the 8th question. There were 2 questions about financial leadership in the district's budget. Example verbatim language used in those questions included items like, quote, how are our taxpayers going to be sure that the money they pay will be used responsibly? Quote, how do you plan to cut wasteful spending and ensure funds are utilized on what teachers and students actually need? End quotes. Can you share your experience, Dr. Lucabaugh, managing school district budgets and the principles that guide your financial decision making?
Well, we know, first of all, we're dealing with a finite amount of resources. About 78% of our budget is already encumbered in personnel and benefits. And so with that 22% piece of the pie, we have a tremendous obligation. So the first thing, especially coming in from outside the district, is take a very, very close look and a line item look at how we are spending money. Because we need to make sure that expenditures are in line with educational priorities. And if we are spending money on things that do not further the district's educational priorities, then we need to take a look at how to adjust that. And so a line item approach to really take a deep dive, and it takes time and it takes work. And I think it's something that should be done very transparently to ensure that we really are spending money where it matters and where it has a return on investment. So that's the first thing. The second thing is identifying the needs over wants. And there are plenty of things that we all want. But it's making sure that we start from a zero-based approach and what are the things that we need to support learning. And being very careful about not exercising funds for things that we don't. And so that is incredibly important. I think the other thing that we need to do is look at alternative sources of funding. There are millions of dollars of grants and grant monies that are left on the table every year across this country. And it's educating ourselves about alternative sources of funding and how we can use that funding to supplement district programs and initiatives. But it takes discipline, it takes awareness, it takes good conversation. It means hard conversations, but it really comes down to aligning your priorities with your expenditures and holding that line. And those are some of the ways that I'll approach.
Is that what you did with the $700,000?
So Dr. Lucabaugh, we're on question number 9. So there's this one and one more, okay? 2 questions spoke to communication about stakeholder voice. Verbatim example language used in those questions included items like, quote, how will you ensure that, I'm going to start over, quote, how will you ensure that parent opinions are heard? Quote, are you willing to listen to diverse points of view from educators, parents, taxpayers, and students? Can you give examples of how you've done this in the past? End quotes. So Dr. Lucabaugh, what will communication look like under your tenure? How will you engage with the various community stakeholders like the students, parents, staff members, community members to gather their input? And can the Centennial community expect you to be accessible and responsive to their questions and concerns?
Sure, so I'll try that in stages, and if I forgot something, I'll come back.
Yeah, please.
So first of all, parent engagement, it's something I look forward to, and it's something that's incredibly important. You can expect that I will be meeting with the community. You can expect that I will be holding meetings in every single one of our schools with parents. You can expect that I will have parent councils and interacting with parents. It's something that I did in Central Bucks. I had a standing parent advisory council. There was a representative or 2 from every one of our schools across the district, and we would meet about every 6 weeks to talk about things that are going on in the district, and it was an incredible group and very, very helpful for informing some of my work and decisions. And it's also something, by the way, that I will do with students as well, that engagement. I told the board when I was through the interview process, that I will be in every classroom in this district by the end of December. I think it's very important to understand what is going on in schools. I think it's important to engage, and when it comes to parents in the community, that's very important. That accessibility and visibility, incredibly important, and you deserve that access and that interaction. In terms of communication, you can expect it to be timely, transparent, and succinct. And it's kind of a funny story. In one of my parent council meetings, I had one of the ladies, CD South parents, say, "Hey, can you back down on the novels that you're sending out?" I'm like, "Whoa." I said, "You don't." She's like, "They're too long. Like, just tone it down." And I said, "Well, do you all deserve it?" And the resounding sentiment was, "Yes, you're too wordy, cut it down." So I took it to heart, and we started to put out 45 to 60-second video segments of just upcoming things that are going on in the district. Everybody, Dr. Lucabaugh here to talk to you about a program. And you wouldn't believe how we had metrics to notice it. People were watching them all the way through because it was only 45 seconds. I don't know what that says about our attention spans, but people are busy. And so you can expect communication to be timely. If something is going on in the district, if it impacts the community, teachers, students, the overall programs, you're going to know about it up front, not right before something happens. You deserve to know well in advance. It will be transparent. I'm going to be honest. If we have problems, we're going to talk about them. If there's something that's not working, I won't sugarcoat it. I'll tell you, this is an issue we're dealing with. This is how we can approach it. How do we best solve it? And succinct.
Dr. Lucabaugh, this is the final question of the forum. Before I ask it, just to note that there were a handful of other questions not explicitly addressed by me tonight. They asked about the process for the search, which has been included in the press releases and has been spoken about several times tonight. They asked about the terms of the employment agreement, as well as legal fees, insurance, and related costs of separation between Dr. Lucabaugh and the board. To my knowledge, the agreement will be shared in advance of the board meeting on the 27th, and I defer, of course, those questions to the board once the contract is made public. There were questions about child abuse in a neighboring district. There was a question or a concern about the district's use of the Anti-Defamation League's No Place for Hate program. There was a concern voiced about the perceptions of a lack of teaching happening in Centennial classrooms. So as a reminder, Dr. Lucabaugh has received a copy of every question, and so he's aware of all of those as well. Additionally, opportunities to interact, of course, with Dr. Lucabaugh are not limited to this evening or to this format or to this forum. Once board approved, Dr. Lucabaugh will be accessible. With that said, here's the 10th and final question for tonight's forum. Several questions spoke about the challenge of division and the need to restore public confidence. While those weren't always phrased as direct questions, they reflected a clear concern to me as the person reading them. How will you lead in a way that brings people together after contention? What steps will you take to establish credibility, build trust, and unify the district under your leadership?
Well, I think trust is something that takes a lot of time. I think it's about being consistent and being committed to making decisions that honor all students. Every decision we make as a district, and when I say every decision that we make as a district, has to be centered on what is best for students and what is best for students' outcomes. And when that becomes the standard, and when we base our decisions about curriculum, our decisions about finance, our decisions about programs and services, when they are all anchored in that construct, unity starts to come through. But I think it's also about developing community. I think it goes back to some of the things that I talked about. It's being accessible. You have to understand the problems that you're trying to solve. And you can't solve problems that you don't understand. And so in order to appropriately solve the problems that are an inevitable part of our work, I have to be out there. I have to be talking with people. I have to be listening, and listening with intention. I have to be accessible. I have to understand how things work. I have to understand the community's priorities. I have to understand how we can bridge the gap to connect our community and our students to resources that are going to make all of us better. But I think everybody can agree that ultimately we want our students to be empowered. We want them to be capable readers, excellent writers, confident speakers. We want them to be able to analyze, problem solve, collaborate, and be confident. And I think if that's our outcome, that's the goal, that's what we want for all the students in Centennial, then we'll have done well because we're working around a shared purpose and something that we all believe matters.
Well, to my former one-time neighbors, thank you for participating in tonight's community forum. To the folks that are watching online, thank you for engaging as well, participating in this important process. This is your school district, whether you work here, you send children here, you pay taxes here, you have some connection to the school district. This is a great example of political civic engagement. Little p political, right? People getting involved. To those that submitted questions, thank you. To those that participated in the survey, thank you. They were instructive, I know, for the board to understand the views and feelings of the community to help them in developing the questions that they asked and in making the selections that they made. I told you when I made my earlier comments that tonight was focused on three parts or three components. The first was Dr. Lucabaugh's introductory comments. The second was this Q&A, which we just completed. And the third will be Dr. Lucabaugh having an opportunity to provide some concluding comments. Once he does that, Ms. Brancato, as board president, will bid everyone a farewell. And so with that said, Dr. Lucabaugh, the floor is again yours. You can use that time to your advantage to reinforce anything you'd like to say again or to bring up any new topic. And we can do that from the floor if that's more comfortable for you. Or you can do it here.
I'll do it from here.
Do it here?
Yeah, just to
All right.
save time.
Perfect.
One of the great things about education is that, well, first of all, this time of year is very exciting, and I just wanted to, again, thank everyone for being here tonight. Thank you for the questions that you submitted and for your interest. It's very, very important that you're here and that you have that. I also want to congratulate, in a few weeks, the graduates of Centennial. The class of 2025, to our graduates and their families. It's a really exciting time. It's a proud moment, and I hope that you walk away feeling good about your experiences in the district. One of the great things about education is that years end and a new year begins in the fall. And with that is new beginnings and a new promise. It's a chance to reset. It's a chance to do things over again. And I think we all need that. I think everyone needs that break and that reset and that fresh start. I know that trust is something that you earn. You don't get an advance payment on trust. Trust is something that you build each day with your interactions. I am not here tonight asking you to trust. I'm asking tonight for an opportunity to earn that trust. I am incredibly passionate about this work. I have tremendous respect for our employees, our families, and especially our students, and the things that they deal with and must manage in their lives. And I understand the importance and the power of this work. So I'm just asking for an opportunity to earn that trust over time. And I'm asking that you would judge me on the relationships that I build, the relationships that we build, and the results that we generate. Because I think that this is a district that is poised to be one of the premier districts, not only in Bucks County, but in the state. And I think that if we work together, if we have clear vision and determination, we can build something that you can be incredibly proud of beyond what you already are. So I thank you tonight. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate the respect that you showed. And I'm excited to work with you and for you to help our students succeed. So thank you.
Dr. Lucabaugh, everyone please join me in. Thank you. Ms. Brown, for concluding remarks?
Once again, thank you, Dr. Lucabaugh, and thank you, Dr. Hoffman, and the entire Bucks IU team, not only for your help tonight's event, for your assistance with the entire superintendent search process. On behalf of the Centennial School District Board of School Directors, I want to also thank the students, staff, and community members who attended this evening. This event was live streamed and a link will be made available on the Centennial School District website for a recording of this event for anyone wishing to watch this at their convenience. Thank you to the Bucks IU technology team for helping the school district with recording and live streaming this event. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and I hope all of you have an enjoyable rest of your evening and a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Thank you.